Yippee-ki-yay, here we go. The history of Darwin, Darwin's theory of natural selection. All right, February 12th, 1809, in Shrewsbury, England, is when Charles Darwin was born. Just happens to be the same day that Abraham Lincoln was born, too. Pretty cool. Not in the same place, though. Darwin attended the University of Edinburgh at the age of 16 to become a doctor, just like his father and his grandfather. So he's kind of smart, little bit of smartness there. All right, in December of 1831, so he's 22 years old, Darwin graduated college, and instead of entering the seminary, he decides to join Captain Robert Fitzroy on the HMS Beagle as the doctor and naturalist as the ship. You should look up, what does HMS Beagle stand for? What's HMS stand for? And write that on your paper. At this time, all the ships at this time were required to have a naturalist on board in case a new species was found, and Darwin happened to be a naturalist. This journey took him, you can see it took him around the world. He started up here in England, and he sailed down around South America, all over here. Looks like they got a little confused, well, not really. But then spent a lot of time down here, moved up here. Here's the Galapagos, where he did tons of research, and then came back around here, looped down around the bottom of Australia, came up, back up here over underneath Africa, South America, and back up to Europe. So it took him 5 years. He returns in 1986. He collects plants, animals, fossils at every stop on the journey and sends all of them back to England. Now he gets back in 1836 and 1840 in London. Darwin has a working manuscript on his theory of natural selection. So he's taking all of this information that he just did. He's putting it all together. In 1844, Darwin's manuscript is completed, and he will continue to tinker with it, though. So it's completed, but he's still going to work on it a little bit. Here is a picture of that HMS Beagle. On November 24th, 1859, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection is published. So with that, there is this, Darwin has this thought of descent with modification and natural selection. So instead of using the word evolution, and to note the word evolution is used only once in the entire book, and it's the last word in the whole book. Everything is descent. Descent indicates very long periods of time are required to bring about these modifications within a species so that they're better able to survive and reproduce within that environment. Now, when we say a large amount of time, what does that mean? It depends on the species for sure, but to see these changes take place, it infers a common ancestor here, and that everything breaks off from that, and then here we would have our modern day, what the modern day animal looks like. Evolve just means to change over time. So when we talk about these changes, it's descent with modification. Going back here. All right, so natural selection, the theory that Darwin has is basically states that in nature there's different levels of success and reproduction based on the ability to survive in that environment. That makes sense. Who's going to work out best? The differing rates of success act as a sort of filtering out on the weak traits. And I say weak, I don't mean like wimpy or anything. I mean the traits that are not highly selected for. So weak versus strong. When we look at this concept, strong traits would be beneficial in surviving and reproducing, whereas weak traits would not be beneficial to surviving and reproducing in the harsh characteristics of that environment. So that's the difference when we talk about weak versus strong. We're not talking about does something have big muscles or not. That's our human concept, but that is in no way across the board meaning survivability. Now, huge stresses, environmental stresses, affect the success rate of individuals in a population in a variety of ways. You could have, think about it. Some people work very well under pressure and others fail when they're pressure. Think of test anxiety. I watched you in the last test, and some people were kicked back, relaxed, kind of chilling, and other people were so tense you could probably break a bone in their body if you tried to move them because they were so stiff. Um, and keep in mind that it's the populations that evolve. It's not the individuals. Think of the peppered moths. The peppered moths were not changing. That moth wasn't. It was the populations over time. The somatic cells, somat is one of your prefixes this week, I think. Those are the somatic cells are the ones that make up the body cells versus the germ cells, which are the sperm and the egg. Now, it's the germ cells that are passed on to create the next generation of organisms. We know that from studying genetics. It's the 23rd chromosome. It's that the sperm and the egg, well, not just the 23rd chromosome, but it's the sex cells, the sperm and the egg, not the, my skin cell is not going to do anything to pass on the genetic information, but my sex cells will. So the change occurs in the germ cells if it's going to affect the future of the species. That's why it must survive and reproduce, not just survive. So life is a struggle for existence, and nature ultimately decides who gets to survive and reproduce and doesn't by excessive environmental forces that are killing them off. So, we say that nature ultimately decides, well, I don't know. I mean, obviously nature has an impact. I mean, our natural world around us has an impact, but I would be a little skeptical. There we go. I got it. All right. Now, Thomas Malthus and this principle of population. Darwin read Thomas Malthus's book, and it basically states that there are more organisms that are born than nature can allow to survive. And remember, think about the carrying capacity. Who chooses? Well, according to Malthus, nature chooses based on the traits an organism possesses. Remember that this variation is really important. We talked a lot about that, why the variation is important for species survivability. So here is Malthus's theory. And the graph that would go with this. This is the point of crisis, or where where the population exceeds the resources. All right, in artificial selection, this is where man selects. Just think of the word, it's artificial, it's not natural. Where man selects the desirable traits in a species. So with plants, we're looking at which ones make the best or the most fruit, are the most appealing in the yard or the garden, the prettiest colors, the biggest or the best flavors. With domestic animals, the question is which ones are the most valuable in terms of food. So which ones, we artificially select for which ones are best. Now, man can erase what took nature thousands of years to create. So it's going to take a long time. Changes happen very gradually, but we can control that artificially, which organisms get to produce and which ones don't. Now, this could be a very good thing, but it's not always the best outcome for the environment. Very important point to make. Okay. So remember when we talked about population, same species in the same place at the same time, and they're showing signs of reproduction. There's young that are there. All right, so we want some supporting evidence for common ancestry or a creator, honestly, if we're looking at it, among organisms. So homologous structure, of course, homo means same. And examples of this, when you look at homologous structures, these are the same. They're going to be the same structure. So an arm of a human, a front leg of a cat, the fin of a whale, or the wing of a bird. So they're the same. They're the same structure. And when we look back here at homologous structures, we're talking about one of the things that we include in there are vestigial organs that appear to have been needed in the past but are slowly disappearing. There was some question for a long time about the appendix, but now we're learning a bit more about that appendix, that it's not so worthless anymore. Embryological homologies are seen as a common stages of development. So Darwin kind of was hinting, well, I don't know about hinting, but was using this as the thought that, you know, ultimately we're all coming from the same ancestors because embryologically we look the same. Now, of course, clearly you can make the same argument as far as a creator, that, you know, I mean, if I'm creating everything, why wouldn't I start them all the same and then make changes along the way? You know, just saying. All right, molecular homologies refer to the DNA nucleotide sequences that are being exact in order and function. Obviously, Darwin couldn't write about these because he had not yet discovered them. And so they're looking at molecularly what the similarities are. Biogeography, this is the bio, life, geography, earth. So this is the geographic distribution of species. So basically, where do we find these species? An endemic species refers to a species that's only found in one place. It's usually on an island, because otherwise it's probably going to migrate very easily, or much more easily than on an island. This concept of convergent evolution, this term is used for organisms that only visually appear to be in a closely related, they're closely related simply because they evolved in a similar environment under similar environmental pressures. So the reality is that they may be distantly related to each other. So like these two, and we're going to talk about Pangea coming up, but possibly something along those lines. Now, analogous structures versus homologous were the same structures. This one has the same function, but they're different structures. So like the wing of a bat, and which has bones and muscles, and an insect wing, which doesn't have bones and muscles, but both of them have the same function. They both produce flight. Don't confuse it again with homologous. That's the same structure. Now, homologous structures indicate some sort of common ancestry, where analogous doesn't seem to support that. Right here, we talk about the fossil evidence supports the theory of natural selection by displaying common structures between the species. What we do know absolutely is the fossil record is incomplete because of the nature of how a fossil is made. It's only made under certain conditions, and the fact that some are still undiscovered in the dirt or in some body of water, or maybe they're not there at all. Maybe there's not. They're looking for intermediate organisms to look at the possibility of the origins of human, and that these changes happen. But of course, we don't have any of that evidence to support that. All right, end of our show for today. Have a fabulous night.